everyone. Welcome to the Sales Online Forum 2020. The purpose of this forum is to give presentations on research categories through Google Meet and have an online discussion with other participants. The participants will investigate and research on the theme related to their given categories and present their results in the forum. Other participants will be able to ask questions during the Q&A session. First, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Abigail Surin, and I'll be serving as moderator for this forum, The World After COVID-19. Before we welcome our first presenter, I'd like to give a short outline on our research category. The coronavirus pandemic has impacted worldwide economies badly and has exacerbated the climate crisis issue, which has affected our future in all aspects, from a socio-economic standpoint to the environment and even on the role of youth. We are here today to discuss the effects of this pandemic and what a post-pandemic world would look like. Now, I'd like to call upon our first presenter, Mark Russell Dancis Carranzo, to give his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Russell Dancis Carranzo from the Philippines, studying at Philippine Science High School Eastern Visayas campus. I will be presenting today my research study under the category The World After COVID-19. Please allow me to screen share my presentation slides. With over 14 million cases confirmed and a staggering 600,000 lives claimed worldwide.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry for interrupting, but could you please screen share your slides? You could press the play button on the bottom right corner. The orange one.
Can you see my screen now?
Make sure it's in full screen, so we don't see the settings. You can press the play button at the bottom right. Yeah, that button.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see your screen, but it's not in full screen. Slide show your screen. You can press go to the bottom right corner, press the play button. Yeah, that button.
How about that? Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, I can see your screen, but it's not in full screen. Sorry? You have to put it on presenting mode. You have to present it so we can see the full slide.
How about that?
It's okay. Okay, you can continue now. Sorry for interrupting.
That's fine. With over 14 million cases confirmed and a staggering 600,000 lives claimed worldwide, COVID-19 has continued to dominate local and international headlines since the disease was first reported in December of 2019. Aiming to help the post-COVID-19 world prepare for the next disease outbreak, my study is entitled Strengthening Socio-Political Systems and Proactive Initiatives for Future Disease Outbreaks. The World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control have voiced their concerns over how COVID-19 overwhelmed various healthcare systems across the world, as the available health facilities and services were not on a par with the volume of patients who need medical care. For instance, in the Philippines, Health Secretary Francisco Duque III confided that the country had not anticipated the pandemic's outcome. Consequently, the country could not allocate ample funding for buying enough personal protective equipment. Moreover, President Rodrigo Duterte previously stated that the country's COVID-19 response resources have been running low as the outbreak was not included in the 2020 national budget. Therefore, it is undeniable that the existence of multi-sectoral and operational plans both in the national and subnational levels is vital to mitigate the effects of a disease outbreak. On the other hand, various studies have also linked human activities to the emergence of disease outbreaks in the past few decades. Increased deforestation, unmanaged agriculture, and excessive encroachment into wildlife territories have provided a breeding ground for the spillover of zoonotic diseases. This situation has even been compounded by unprecedented globalization, which has connected countries with air transportation. Hence, the spread of infectious diseases has become more rampant and rapid. Therefore, this study proposes that two factors are necessary to alleviate the detrimental impacts of disease outbreaks: effective pre-pandemic prevention and aggressive early pandemic response. This study analyzes different socio-political strategies utilized by different countries, specifically Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia during the COVID-19 outbreak based on three key areas: healthcare management, political response, and financial policy response. The said countries were chosen based on their 2019 Global Health Security Index, as published by the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and the Center for Health Security. Moreover, related journals and articles published in Nature and the Time magazine have also suggested that the said countries handled the outbreak well. Although each of these agencies utilized varying criteria, the 5 countries in this study consistently made it to the top of the list. Secondly, this study also encourages different social actors, specifically the legislators, the scientific community, and the youth to prepare for possible outbreaks. Now let's start to summarize the different strategies that the countries have employed in their early pandemic response, starting with Australia. Australia has been commended internationally for their humble submission and respect to scientific opinions. Thus, their decision-making process was firmly anchored on a scientific approach. They also implemented wage subsidies, unemployment benefits, and free childcare to meet its citizens' needs while the country was on lockdown. Furthermore, the country has strengthened its national cabinet to increase coordination between federal and state leaders. Next is Singapore. The country earned a well-deserved recognition due to its aggressive contact tracing strategies. This included scanning people's IDs in public places, such as supermarkets. The country has built temporary bed spaces to house COVID-19 patients, leading to low casualty rates. Lastly, the availability of financial reserves and amendments in their financial policies have kept the Singaporean economy afloat despite the outbreak. Meanwhile, being one of the highly developed countries in Asia in terms of technological advancement, South Korea has taken advantage of its production capacity to mass-produce medical supplies. The country was able to export medical supplies and COVID-19 test kits in the early days of the outbreak. Even without drastic cut in economic activities, South Korea managed to keep its fatality count low. Aggressive contact tracing has also been a trademark strategy of South Korea. Korean citizens allowed to give up their privacy to uphold real-time monitoring of COVID-19 cases. Next is New Zealand. New Zealand is among the first countries to close its borders and implement a level 4 lockdown. The New Zealand government also ensured that its citizens are always updated with a COVID-19 response through coordinated messaging and Facebook Live. The country has also done several tax reforms for the benefit of the general populace. Interestingly, its ministers, along with their prime minister, voluntarily cut their salaries by 20% to keep jobs and reduce unemployment rates. And last is Taiwan.
Sorry for disturbing again. But since you're not in presenter mode, your slides are moving, so we can't see the slide you're supposed to present now. So could you please click on your slides in the gallery? Yes, thank you.
That.
You can move on now.
Next is New Zealand. New Zealand is among the first countries to close its borders and implement a level 4 lockdown. Interestingly, its ministers, along with their prime minister, voluntarily cut their salaries by 20% to keep its jobs and unemployment rates. The last is Taiwan. Taiwan is among the few countries whose economies did not come to a complete halt. Despite being close to the pandemic's original epicenter, the country has successfully kept its cases low. The victory over the outbreak has been primarily attributed to its immediate closing of borders and banning of surgical mask exports. Aggressive safety protocols were observed in every establishment, thus making it possible to continue business operations. The country has also done mobile SIM tracing to identify infected individuals and ensure that they abide to the quarantine rules. Commendably, the country has also done diplomatic outreaches and sent medical supplies to hard-hit countries. Moving on to the second objective of this study, to outline different roles of social actors in preventing and preparing for future outbreaks, starting with the legislators. The inclusion of health emergency funds in the annual appropriations should be considered. Some countries, including the Philippines, have been overwhelmed financially as no funds have been allocated for disease outbreaks. This led to the juggling of funds and great debt. Health mitigation and pandemic preparedness programs must also be taken into account. It is worth noting that some countries were ill-prepared for the minimum health and safety protocol in times of pandemic as they did not have previous first-hand experiences. Hence, just as how the populace is prepared for earthquakes, fires, and other natural calamities, they must also be fully aware of the guidelines to follow in events of outbreaks. Lastly, drafting bills that strengthen academic programs for students who aspire to work on the healthcare sector must also be prioritized. Several countries have experienced a shortage of medical personnel. Hence, increasing the workforce would be necessary to respond to future outbreaks more efficiently. Next, the role of the scientific community would also be indispensable. As more zoonotic spillovers become more rampant and more frequent in the past few years, viral threats must be identified and characterized promptly before human transmission. Thus, we must invest in initiatives similar to the Global Virome Project. At the same time, discovering novel ways of making vaccines would also be essential to hasten the usual vaccine development that usually takes years to finish. Lastly, here is my message to you, my fellow youth, because I believe that we also have a significant role to play. Let us take advantage of the advancement in technology in disseminating useful information on how to lower the risk of outbreaks. Let us advocate for environmental preservation, wildlife protection, funding for health programs, and other related initiatives. May we continue to lobby our political agenda for our governments to hear our calls that would usher legislation in support of our causes. At the same time, I would like to encourage you to pursue careers that would advance public health quality in our respective countries. May this pandemic help us realize the importance of a robust public healthcare system. Who would have thought that an agent as microscopic as a virus would shut down schools, businesses, and economies? Therefore, it is indeed time for us to take a stand in the fight against zoonotic diseases. Despite living in different countries, I believe that we could still work harmoniously with commitment towards a common goal and make changes in our respective communities. Without our help, the cycle would continue, and COVID-19 would be one of the many more outbreaks that the world will ever face. Here is a list of references that I have used in my research. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Now it is time for a Q&A session. We have a question from the YouTube Live comment section. Why do you think that there are a certain group of people that still deny that the virus is real?
I believe that a lot of people are not still aware of this particular phenomena, since I believe that this is caused by lack of education. Hence, it is very important for us, the youth, to educate these people, because in order to mitigate these kinds of outbreaks, it really needs cooperation, national cooperation, international cooperation. It entails every sector in the society to fight this virus. Thus, I believe that education would be the key in order to make these people realize that the virus is real and we must be able to prepare for it in the future and we must mitigate it the best we can.
All right, thank you, Mark. Does anyone have a question they would like to put forward to Mark?
Yes, I do have a question for Mark. So Some people argue that humans are the major cause of disease outbreaks. Do you or do you not agree to the argument?
I believe that a lot of human activities have hastened the emergence of different zoonotic infections and diseases in the past few decades. Hence, I believe that the claim that humans play a major role in disease outbreaks could be sufficiently and significantly substantiated. Allow me to further elaborate my point. As the world entered a new era of increased industrialization and globalization, we humans have caused major ecological destruction with severe repercussions. Remember that the wild is a natural abode to a lot of zoonotic infections and infectious agents which humans have no natural immunity to. However, due to human activities such as unmanaged agriculture, encroachment into wildlife territories, and habitat destruction, the interaction between the general populace and potential reservoir population have increased, thus increasing the probability of spillovers as well. Simply put, humans have forgotten that we are not the only living organisms inhabiting this planet. We have failed to coexist, and instead we have continuously encroached into wildlife territories and have disregarded the fact and have disregarded the importance of setting boundaries between wildlife and the human domains. Hence, may COVID-19 help us realize that it is indeed time and it is about time for us to respond to these emerging threats and to finally respond to this ominous call from the wild. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Does anyone else have any other questions for Mark? Okay, Mark, I have a question for you. Are countries currently cooperating with each other to solve this problem? I mean, the pandemic.
I would have an impartial answer to that because a lot of countries now are mitigating the effects of outbreaks primarily because we have been supplied with information from different international agencies such as World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control. However, despite the guidelines that these agencies have, different countries still have different approaches into that problem. And that is the reason why different countries right now are in different states on how they are responding to these outbreaks. For instance, the countries that I have mentioned earlier, such as Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, they were able to manage and to flatten the curve. They were able to flatten the curve very much promptly than other countries. However, there's the preparation to these outbreaks is also a very important factor and a very important thing to consider. Also, there are a lot of countries who have already had first-hand experiences to different outbreaks. For instance, they have already experiences with Ebola, SARS. That's why they already know a system. They have already developed a system on how to approach these kinds of outbreaks. Meanwhile, some countries, including the Philippines, we have not really encountered a lot of disease outbreaks in the past few decades. That's why we have been very overwhelmed when we were faced with this kind of problem.
All right, thank you, Mark. We have another question from the YouTube Live. How can we as youth work together to help educate people on how to protect themselves against the virus?
As I have mentioned earlier, we have already entered into an age of new digitalization. We are now in a digital age. Hence, we, the youth, since we are active users of different social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, among others, we must take advantage of these different technological advancements in order to utilize these platforms to send our message, to advocate for our causes. We could write essays, we could write articles, we could create different infographics, we could create different YouTube videos, vlogs, advocating for our causes. It is actually very much easier for us to disseminate the information since we are already given such functional platforms at this time.
I have another question for you. Do you think the World Health Organization should release a standardized procedure for all countries to advise for overcoming the pandemic?
I'm sorry?
Do you think the World Health Organization should release a standardized procedure for all countries to avoid to overcome the pandemic?
Yes, it would be very important for the World Health Organization and other international agencies such as the Center for Disease Control to have some set of guidelines that each countries could follow. In this way, the cooperation, the collaboration, and the interaction between the different countries would increase further. And I believe that diplomatic outreaches would also play a very important role, such as what Taiwan did, because I believe that this problem should not only be contained in one country. This is a problem that the world is concerned. Hence, every country must do our best in order to mitigate these kinds of problems. And we could share different strategies. We could share different things, different approaches on how to handle these kinds of problems, so we would be able to handle it well the next time it will come.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. Now it is time for a 5-minute break before we continue on to the next presentation. Don't forget to mute your mics and turn off your cameras. I hope to see you all again shortly. Welcome back, everyone. Now, I'd like to call upon our second presenter, Owen Calvary Raphael Satriadi, to please give his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Owen Calvary Raphael Satriadi from Santa Laurencia High School in Indonesia. The topic that I'll be discussing today is the world after COVID-19. Please allow me to screen share my presentation slides. So the title I give to my presentation is The World After COVID-19, A Fractured Globe. Before I start this presentation, please allow me to start with a thesis as the base for my presentation. The world after COVID-19 will see the US lag behind China as the world will move gradually towards the east due to the US's incompetence and China's resurgence. First, let's discuss the position of the two greatest powers in the world today, USA and China. Before the COVID outbreak, the USA, as we all know, went to a trade war with China, both nations imposing tariffs on one another. But problem arises in the United States as manufacturers found it hard to find its buyers domestically. As for China, manufacturers found it easier to find buyers as China had a large consumer and buying power. Second is the world's superpower and leader in international affairs. Most incidents in the world have America involved in it either militarily or politically. Just to name a few are Syria, Iran, North Korea, Mexico, Venezuela, and etc. Last is the US efforts to protect its foreign interests as they still had a strong power and influence over the world. Some examples are the Gulf War coalition, which was led by the US, or the war on terror. During the pandemic, the US suffered some huge blows. First, their incompetency in handling the pandemic. The US had proved that other than a fragile healthcare system, the government themselves were slow to respond. As stated from the Johns Hopkins University, the Trump administration took 2 months to issue a DPA, a Defense Production Act, which is a rule that private companies should prioritize producing for the government in states of wartime or national emergency. It took 2 months for them to issue a DPA for personal protective equipment, but just 2 days to issue a DPA for meat. Moreover, still quoting from the same source, if the Trump administration issued social distancing just 2 weeks earlier, a staggering 83% of deaths in the USA could be avoided. Second, America had shown that its egotism and individualism that the nation is not the culprit of her demise. There are many pictures and videos circulating around the internet that show many American citizens demonstrating against social distancing measures and the wearing of masks. They stated that it's their body and that they are able to do whatever they want with it. This is a fundamental fact that shows the world that America collapsed because of her own people's disengagement. Third, internal disputes due to social injustice causing disruption domestically. As I have said earlier, there are many demonstrations across the US due to social distancing measures and the wearing of masks. These small and minor demonstrations further escalated in number and severity as the US underwent a nationwide chaos when an African American man, George Floyd, was murdered by the police, but the Trump administration did not really do anything about it. And lastly, was the US involved in poaching medical supplies from its ally countries. For example, medical supplies which were meant to be sent to the EU were poached so that it will be sent to the United States, thus prioritizing them in obtaining the medical supplies. This is correlated to the national stockpiles of PPE to never be resupplied after the H1N1 outbreak. During the Trump administration, things got a lot worse as the late signing of the DPA meant that most masks were still exported, even some to China in March, when the US healthcare system was in dire need of medical supplies. Next, we move over to China. China before the pandemic was quite strong internationally, especially regionally in Asia. More recently, she asserted her dominance in the South China Sea by sending her warships and building military installations. Outside of China, she aided many African countries, such as investing in the small East African country of Djibouti, and in return allowed to build a naval base in the Gulf of Aden, a strategic gulf in between Africa and the Middle East. Nonetheless, they are also filled with controversy. The most notable and recent were the Hong Kong riots, which still ran through the COVID-19 epidemic, and the Uyghur peoples and the treatment towards the Uyghur people, which dragged international recognition. During the COVID-19 pandemic, China used it to their advantage. First of all, they sent medical supplies to nations affected by the epidemic. I take Indonesia as an example. In less than a month after Indonesia reported its first cases, China sent Indonesia medical supplies such as masks, test kits, hazmat suits, portable ventilators, and etc. By doing this, they made themselves a better image of their country in the world stage, a nation which is willing to help. Even more, they showed that they are committed to help moving into the second point. Citing from local news Republica, China promised to send a second wave of medical supplies as they supported the Indonesian government in fighting the virus in June. The most commitment China showed, in my opinion, was the time when they sent medical personnel to hard-hit Italy, although they still had thousands of cases back home. These Chinese doctors proved to give a valuable experience to these Italian doctors and relieve their pressure. And this is a great sacrifice for me, as China herself has still thousands of cases back home. And the last one is the Chinese heavy use of propaganda. The world was impressed with China's ability to build a hospital in Wuhan in just around 2 weeks. Furthermore, there was a video circulating in the internet that showed the Chinese people giving respect by just simply giving a bow towards the medical workers whose valiant efforts saved China from the epidemic. The world post-COVID-19 will be a different world, well, at least for these two world superpowers. For the US domestically, there will be an increase in social unrest. After the George Floyd incident, the US was bombarded with more police brutality news that shocked the nation and the world, and will result in further unrest as the epidemic resides, unless the administration is willing to make reforms. Second is the amount of unemployed people, which will be staggering. Yes, jobs will be open as businesses will start to open up after the epidemic, but according to Statista, there are currently 17.75 million people unemployed in the USA, and with that amount, it will be a huge task for the government to redistribute the working people, as many businesses had gone bust during the pandemic, such as restaurants, massage parlors, or hotels. And lastly, the government will cut budgets in sectors that are not primarily important, such as the military, and allocate it to the medical sector in order not to repeat its mistake after the H1N1 outbreak. This means that as the US is rebuilding from the devastation at the administration sitting in the White House in 2021, the US will focus domestically rather than internationally, a policy known as the America First policy. The US will reduce her influence from the international world for quite some time to rebuild itself. But the Truman Doctrine will put the US back in the international stage to protect its interests, but this will leave power vacuum and China will resume in the US's vacuum for a while. This will also lead to an image as being weak and inept. The world thought that the US was a dominant player in the world stage, but the pandemic showed that the US was incapable of handling its own domestic problems. So how can a nation rely on someone else who could not handle its own internal mess? To sum up, the US will be weakened after the pandemic ended. Its influence, whether domestically or internationally, will diminish as the COVID-19 pandemic reduced the US's greatest before it. For China domestically, it is forecasted to be a nation to have the first and fastest economic growth. As the world is facing the brunt of the pandemic, China, being the first nation infected and recovered, will take the time to rebuild its crippled economy. After the pandemic ends and the entire world and nations start to rebuild and recover the economy, China will be far ahead as it took the time when the whole world went to lockdown and had the capacity to stand on its feet alone. So according to Statista, the growth for the US in 2020 is negative 5.9%, while China will have a meager 1.2% growth. In 2021, the year where health experts predicted the end of COVID-19, the US will have a 4.74% growth, while China is expected to have a staggering 9.2% growth. Although China will rise economically, there will be some internal disputes within the population as well. According to Reuters, there's an act of national discontent towards the government and censorship, especially in the city of Wuhan. There are videos showing Wuhan citizens shouting "It's fake" when groceries were distributed to houses, while Vice Premier Sun Qianlan's visit. In a nation with heavy censorship, it was a rare glimpse of how China's citizens reacted and felt truly. Not long after the publication of the video, the government erased the video in Weibo, or the world's equivalent to Twitter. Internationally, with the help China had been doing during the pandemic to other countries, it surely would create a better image of a world leader. Many countries will now turn to China for assistance, most being from countries in Africa or South America who have a developing status. Under the Belt and Road Initiative, I quote from Deputy Director and Senior Research Fellow of International Development Cooperation, Mao Xianqing. China teaches this nation to fish instead of giving them fish. This will allow China to improve international cooperation with other countries, as they have a different approach compared to the US by just simply giving economic assistance. And of course, China will increase its influence in the US's vacuum. So to sum up, China will have a stronger international influence and position in the world stage after the COVID-19 epidemic. From this presentation, we can draw up some conclusions. First, the balance of power both economically and politically would shift towards the east, also known as Sinocentrism. Second is de-Westernization in most countries and a shift towards Easternization. Third, the US will be reduced in power and influence as it will focus internally for a short period of time, though as the Truman Doctrine, a doctrine which has been accepted by both Democrats and Republicans, will see the US bounce back to the world stage. Fourth is China being a global power filling in the US's vacuum in the world stage. And lastly is the continuation of the US and China rivalry, as the US will try to knock China from their perch and China wishing to maintain her dominance in the world stage as a global superpower. To reduce the huge impact of the world after the epidemic, there are some steps taken. Here are some of the solutions. First, whoever wins the November elections in the White House in the United States, they should quickly solve the current social unrest and any other domestic issues they have, such as unemployment or failing businesses, so the US can go back up in their feet and return to the world stage as quickly as possible so the shift won't be too massive. Second, world leaders setting aside their political agendas to build a better humanity. An example as of late is the withdrawing of the US from the Paris Agreement and probably the WHO. If this happens, nations will no longer look to these organizations as it has lost its credibility. Next, the involvement of youth who have a voice, such as Greta Thunberg or Malala Yousafzai, to promote international cooperation rather than separation. Then, using online platforms such as this one to voice out our opinions and educate the public on the possibility of the ongoing crisis. Furthermore, strengthening the non-aligned movement to act as a median if another Cold War breaks out between the US and China. The NAM has been proven to prevent a hot war between the USSR and the USA, and surely they too can prevent any possibilities of war. And lastly is strengthening regional alliances like the ASEAN, the EU, or the AU, so they essentially cannot be bullied by the great powers. The EU, for example, has emerging countries such as Germany who are proven to lead and no longer depend on the United States for leadership, or Indonesia, who is proven to be able to protect its maritime zones from a nation like China. Strengthening these alliances can oppose the breadth of the two superpowers if a Cold War may indeed happen. As a closing for this presentation, I have a quote from Abraham Lincoln, a supporter of a united America. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Thank you.
Alright, thank you, Owen. Now it is time for a Q&A session. Does anyone have a question for Owen?
Hi, Owen. Sorry. Thank you. So I want to ask, besides the natural supply, what kind of impact does US and China relation bring to your country?
The US and China relations, other than healthcare medical supplies, it also affects the world's economy. For example, in Indonesia, China is trying to gain influence, especially regionally in Asia. Indonesia has experienced a lot of increase in Chinese investment, such as the building of fast trains or building of smelters in many mining companies. So I believe that the rivalry between the USA and China will also affect the world's economy. Thank you.
Hello, I also have another question. Since in your presentation you said that in the aftermath of the COVID-19, China will have a greater influence and then US will have a weaker stand in the world stage. Now, how can this affect specifically the Southeast Asian countries, which some are depending on the superpowers, or not really depending, like allies, some even are are enemies, but how can this affect the Southeast Asian nations? That's my question.
I can take back from the example I used in Indonesia. Indonesia is in the non-aligned movement, so we don't really tend to any of these two countries politically, but economically we stand towards who invests more in our country. We don't really care about politics because in Indonesia there is a lot of sentiment towards these two nations' ideologies, particularly China. So these two nations will, of course, these two nations will affect Southeast Asia, particularly economically, but there may be a bit of political interference, but we cannot prove that. So I will say that our economy really depends on these two nations.
All right, thank you, Owen. Does anyone else have a question for Owen? Okay, I'll read the question. I'll ask Owen the questions from the YouTube live. How does the economic status in the US and China affect the other countries in Asia, especially during these troubling times?
China is proven to stand on its feet alone, as we can see from now. After their epidemic ends, they are going back into business, and right now they're surviving. Meanwhile, for the USA, the number of unemployment is staggering. Many businesses could not stand up because international trade, due to this pandemic, is disturbed. I'm sorry, what's the question again?
How does the economic status in the US and China affect the other countries in Asia, especially during these troubling times?
Okay, so yeah, as we can see, China's economy is very strong, while the USA right now is very weak. If China is strong, they are prone to investing in other countries because they also need that influence to grab other countries' recognition that they are the strongest, that they are the leader in the world.
All right, thank you, Owen. I'll read the other question in the chat box. In your opinion, are youth's voice adequate enough to push for global socio-economic change?
As we can see right now, it's not really that huge. But if there's only a few youths who speak out against the socio-economic disruption, it won't be enough because most countries in the world are democratic. Those who have a voice, those who are a majority, the government will listen to. If there's only a small number of youth who are able to speak out, the governments and world leaders won't bother even listening to us. But if the youth themselves, they take notice of this issue, they speak out through social media or online platforms like this one, governments will take notice. If the youth can understand the ongoing crisis, why don't they take attention to this crisis?
All right, thank you, Owen. I'll read the other question in the chat box. In your opinion, why do you think most world leaders choose to be more power hungry and would rather not focus on the needs of their nation?
In my opinion, many countries are ruled by political dynasties. They want to shape the world and they want to shape their nation in order to suit their needs. And furthermore, there is a growing need. There's a sort of nationalism. Like in Indonesia, there's a lot of sentiment towards Chinese migrant workers. These migrant workers cause a lot of disruption politically, in particular the government. So if we're looking for global cooperation, countries' governments look to cooperate with other countries to solve this current issue as fast as possible. I think it can be done, but the people themselves are the problem. They have a lot of sentiment towards other countries, which the government themselves are confused which sides to pick. If they choose for cooperation to help the people, they will get sort of internal hate, and it will reduce their chances of winning the next presidential election, for example. But if they choose what the people needs, the country will probably go to the brink of collapse, as you can see from the United States. So that's my take on that.
All right, thank you again, Owen. Now it is time for a 5-minute break before we continue on to the next presenter. Please remember to turn off your cameras and mute your mics. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. Now, I'd like to call upon our third presenter, Russell Kingsley John, to give his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Russell Kingsley John. I'm from Indonesia, in particular from Santa Laurencia Senior High School. And today I would like to present about my research about the higher unemployment rate post COVID-19. Please allow me to screen share my presentation slides. So my research is entitled "The World After COVID-19."
Sorry for interrupting, but I can't see your screen. You're not screen sharing your screen. Sorry, Russell, but are you having any troubles screen sharing?
Hold on.
Okay.
Now, can everyone see my screen?
Sorry, Russell, but we can't see your screen. Is it okay if I ask our tech support team to help you screen share your slide?
Okay.
Okay. Remember to slideshow your slides. Okay. Press the slideshow button on the bottom right corner.
All right. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yeah, we can see your screen, but it's not in presenter mode. So how you can press the bottom right button. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Can I start? Okay.
Yes, you can
So
continue.
my research is entitled "The World." So my research is entitled "The World After COVID-19: A Higher but Relievable Unemployment Rate." Before going into the data, I would like to explain several shifts caused by COVID-19 that contributes to the rise of unemployment rate. First is that many stores will face permanent closure. This is because they have to face fierce pressure due to online competition because people are changing their shopping routines, which according to a Where to Go survey, 64% have replaced their traditional weekly shopping trips with online ordering. And in this case, the fierce pressure can be seen through the retail sales, which happened to fall by 20% in China. According to a survey done by many experts, 70% of smaller restaurants are also at risk of permanent closure if the COVID-19 crisis lasts for 4 months or more. So as you can see, the COVID-19 has created a threat to many stores by creating the permanent closure and may cause a huge number of people to face unemployment and increase the unemployment rate for post-COVID-19. Secondly, the COVID-19 has developed digitalization. As you can see from the first graph at the left side, the daily average consumption back in December 2019 was still 100% and went down 39% during COVID-19 peak. And even after the COVID-19 peak, the daily average consumption was still 21% below the daily average consumption back in December 2019. In other countries such as the United States, there are many first users that are adopting to digital channels in different kind of sectors, including banking, entertainment, grocery, apparel, utilities, and etc. So as you can see, the world is facing digitalization from these two graphs. And according to a study, this digitalization may replace human with machines and may cause 38% jobs to vanish out of 751 occupations. So currently, according to an article written by Clark in 2020 and posted by UN News, the global unemployment has reached 190 million, even before the COVID-19 has spread worldwide. And according to International Labor Organization, there are 25 million jobs at risk due to the new coronavirus. And as you can see at the right side, International Monetary Fund has projected that for Asian and Pacific countries, all of the countries listed are projected to face a higher unemployment rate for this 2020 and upcoming 2021. But these cases do not only apply to Asian and Pacific countries, but actually to most countries around the world, like the Western Hemisphere, European countries, and many other more. But we have to remember that these numbers are just projections. These rates are just projections, and it all starts with us. We still have the power to change, to prevent, or to alleviate the rise of unemployment. We still can prevent ourselves from getting the impacts of unemployment, these advantages of unemployment itself. We can apply countermeasures, including advocate ourselves to be employed, as many studies have proven that higher education decrease the unemployment rate as they create a more predominant employment status. We can also encourage the unemployed to educate themselves, as education significantly increases the re-employment success for them. And due to the coronavirus or COVID-19 that developed digitalization, we have to remember there's the need of 21st century skills, which according to World Economic Forum is essential so that we can thrive in a rapidly evolving technology mediated world, and because of the changes in labor market that cause the shift in skill demand. It is also essential because it comprises different kind of skills, including collaboration, communication, creativity, and most importantly, literacy, which include ICT literacy that may help us to survive through digitalization. Secondly, we can utilize regenerators. These regenerators can ensure financial products instead of providing more debt, like the Centrifuge company, which work with new entrepreneurs to start up businesses and connect them with global industry-leading consumers. And these regenerators can also provide services for financially impaired firms, like for the case of Indonesian government, who recently lent money to the small, micro, and medium businesses for capital. And last but not least, these regenerators may also provide sophisticated training to new entrepreneurs like the Mortar Hub. As for the third countermeasure, as many of us are a part of Generation C and Millennial, and we are living in a world with digitalization developing and growing fastly, and we can utilize new Generation C and Millennial jobs such as blogger, YouTube content creator, in which you can talk about experience how to work from home, or tips for parents to kid activities during pandemic. And you can also be an internet marketer from the sponsored social media posts, promotion through vlogs. You can also be an influencer, or you can also be a podcast producer talking about how you structure your unstructured time, how you work remotely from home, like the podcast done by stand-up comedian Kumail Nanjiani and writer Emily V. Gordon in the Staying In podcast. We can also utilize digitalization to facilitate and drive new job opportunities. For example, e-commerce, which according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, it has gained 178,000 jobs. And this digitalization, using the same example, does not only help us to get ourselves being employed, but it may open opportunity to many other people as it opens employee recruitment. And according to experts, approximately 3/4 of e-commerce firms have up to 4 employees. At the end, the higher unemployment rate is still relievable. We still can change, we still can prevent, we still can alleviate the rise of unemployment. We still can prevent ourselves from getting the impact disadvantages of the unemployment. To end this presentation, I would like to read everyone an empowering quote by Mary McLaughlin. We have a powerful potential in our youth, and we must have the courage to change old ideas and practices so that we may direct new power toward good ends. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Russell, for your presentation. Now it is time for a Q&A session. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask Russell?
Hi, Russell. I have a question. Considering that a lot of people in far-flung areas or poverty-stricken places do not really have access to quality education, in what ways can these people obtain these 21st century skills, and what facilities are needed to do so?
Okay, so regarding to Mark's question, I think that the government has a great impact and should take actions to provide facilities to people so that they can obtain these 21st century skills, and they can use personalized and adaptive technology or curricula. They can use interactive simulations and games, which not only focus on mathematics and scientific concepts, but also focus on your creativity, your curiosity, and also you can utilize maximum communication tools, which help us, which facilitates so that people could work in.
All right, I apologize as Russell has a bit of technical issues. We'll wait for him to sort it out. Russell, are you okay? Is everything okay? All right. Sorry, everyone. Russell has just left the meeting, and he is now here again.
I'm sorry, everyone.
All right, Russell.
So,
Is everything okay at your side?
okay.
Okay.
So to continue Mark's question, we can also use education technology that may help teachers so they can free up their time to teach students about competencies and different kind of character qualities, and they can use collaboration and communication tools which help to facilitate peer-to-peer learning or peer feedbacks and also group working. So that's the answer for Mark's question.
All right. Thank you, Russell. Now I'll ask you the question from the chat box. Do you think the Gen Z, compared to other generations, have an advantage in this new digital world?
Yes, because there are many different kind of jobs that are not there yet for our parents from the generation before the Generation Z or before the millennial. So I think also because of the digitalization, the Generation Z and millennials have a bigger job opportunities.
All right, thank you, Russell. The next question. What steps can the government do to help small scale businesses from closing down since they are the ones heavily affected by the pandemic, economically speaking?
So I'm just going to use the example from my country, Indonesia, which recently worked with small, medium, and micro businesses. They lend money for the businesses as a capital, and they may also give tax relief so they don't have to face a bigger expense during this pandemic.
All right, thank you, Russell. The next question. While new jobs are being created in this situation, does this mean the course of education will change?
Um, on my personal opinion, because according to my research also, I think the course of education will change because they have to adapt to the digital skills that are needed for the future jobs due to digitalization. So, of course, the course of education will change.
Okay, thank you for your answer. So the next question, what about white and blue collar job holders who may have difficulties finding a position in this digital economy?
So, for I will focus on education because I think education is very essential. We have to go back to education, and because we're living in as the question said, that digital economy, we have to focus on 21st century skills, which may help us to survive in this digitalization, so that the white and blue collar job holders can have job opportunity.
All right, thank you, Russell. The next question, why do you think that certain countries have been hit worse economically compared to other countries?
So according to my opinion, I think it's because of the uh, well. To be honest, I can't say surely, but I think I can say surely. So I think I'm really glad that question was stated, but I can't answer it right now.
It's okay. Okay, Russell, I have another question for you. What since you mentioned just now, the job alternatives surround technology and the digital world, such as YouTube content creators and bloggers. How about those who live in the suburbs who don't have internet? What are the job alternatives for the Gen Z and millennials in the suburbs who they don't have sufficient access to internet?
I think that the government actually should take action so they can provide facilities. So because uh, digitalization will always keep growing, developing, and it's not about digitalization adapting to humans, but humans should adapt to digitalization. So I think that the government should take actions to provide facilities and so that they could have a greater job opportunity.
All right, thank you, Russell. The next question, how do we prepare ourselves for this new digital age?
So as I said before, we need to focus on education. We need to focus on an education that may help us to gain skills, the 21st century skills, so that we can survive digitalization. And in particular for schools, I think the question that should be considered is that what skills are needed for the future jobs so they can teach competencies and skills that are related to future jobs. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Russell. Does anyone else have any questions for Russell? All right. There seems to be no more questions for Russell. Thank you very much, Russell. Now we'll move on to a 5-minute break before we continue on to the next presentation. A gentle reminder again to please switch off your cameras and turn off your mics. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Now we'll continue on to the next presentation from Chan Yi-wen. You can start now, Chan.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chan Yiwen from Hongshan Senior High School in Taiwan. So please allow me to screen share my presentation slide. Oops. Sorry. Is it okay? So my topic today is the world after COVID-19, and I'll start with the problems that the world faces. For example, human health crisis. COVID-19 has caused a lot of deaths and casualties, and I'll list some places for the environment recovery example. So because the whole country is under lockdown, locals and Danes have noticed that the water in the canals has become much clearer. And locally, goats only tend to wander only on hillside. However, as people cannot go out, goats also take the opportunity to sightsee in the city center. And observation shows that the concentration of nitrogen dioxide has dropped significantly compared with the same period as the last year. So, in the economy recession, the part I'll be focused on. For example, economic turmoil associated with COVID-19 has had wide-ranging and severe impacts upon financial markets, including stock, bond, and commodities. The outbreak forced several companies and factories to halt production, and the restaurants, nightclubs are closed too. As the government banned entry and exit, the tourism receipts experienced a sharp decline. Next, I'll talk about the problems deeper inside behind economic recession impact. First, social security problems. Intuitively, it makes sense that people replace legitimate business with theft and fraud during desperate times. Many police agencies reported rising instances of robbery, burglary, and motor vehicle theft as a result of the Great Recession and the rising unemployment. The COVID-19 outbreak and the economic downturn engendered swelled the ranks of unemployed Americans by more than 14 million, from 6.2 million in February to 20.5 million in May 2020. Also, the factories forced employees on paid leave and layoffs, and the social instability. The more strict local lockdowns have increased the chances of riots, violence against civilians, and food-related conflicts in the African countries analyzed. 3 months into the coronavirus, the world is on the verge of another health crisis, with daily doses of death, isolation, and fear generating widespread psychological trauma. Experts warn that a historic wave of mental health problems is approaching. Depression, substance abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide. Economic recession brings about a lot of problems like social instability, unemployment, and social security problems such as the rise of theft cases. Once the country loses security, citizens will no longer feel secure and the society may not work functionally. Now let's go back to Taiwan. How do we solve the problem? But before we start to talk about the problems behind the economic recession, I also want to share what we have done for the pandemic. Learning from SARS experiences, we avoid panic buying. An obvious wrong information such as people rumor that masks are made of toilet paper, in fact, it's not true. The government tries its best to clarify the truth, thus people won't hoard things in panic. And we also distribute masks probably with an app. The government hires some engineers and companies to design it. The app shows citizens a map which pharmacy they can get masks and check the numbers of them. To avoid crowd, it also tells you what dates to buy. Strict temperature check in schools, restaurants, and any indoor places. And sterilize every day in every place. We stress on public hygiene more important, and you can see sanitizer everywhere. So we also have the strict check at airport on every passenger's health condition and travel history. Those who fail to meet standards will be sent into quarantine hotels directly. So in person, we also encourage people to wear masks and give correct concept to citizens that just because we wear masks doesn't mean that we are ill. Masks serve as great protection against virus. And in public hygiene, we encourage through sterilization on schools, restaurants, companies, transportation, and each policy, no matter it's indoors or outdoors. Preschool, for example, students in Taiwan need to sterilize classrooms every day with bleach liquid. With the measures, the chance of being infected is largely reduced. As a result, in Taiwan, we don't experience lockdown and we live our lives as usual during the pandemic. So the schools and companies work as usual. That's why later in April, Taiwan is launching a campaign of Taiwan Can Help, in which Taiwan distributes lots of masks to other countries. Besides that, situation in Taiwan also prompts us to pay heed to economy problems. In Taiwan, a lot of merchants work in China and lots of tourists are from China too. When we close the airlines from China because of the pandemic, the interaction between us, including commercial activities, is halted, which influences the economy, particularly on tourism, a lot. So what Taiwan has done in terms of economy, Taiwan launched its triple stimulus voucher program to help stimulate Taiwan's sagging economy and amid the coronavirus. The program allows Taiwanese citizens as well as foreign spouses to purchase an envelope of vouchers worth a total of $100. That means government gives you $100 for free to boost domestic economy. Besides, it also gives a voucher in different fields, such as for shows and exhibition. You can use them to watch a movie, buy some books, and visit museums. For sports equipment and shoes, you can use it to watch a game or buy a pair of sneakers. And Hakka cultural activities, you can use it to visit cultural parks for free. Each for a different value, and you can use them as money. In other words, government gives you money, encourages you to consume. And for those who influence about their jobs in pandemic, government boosts the relief package. Relief package covers everyone from families in disadvantaged groups to companies and industry. The package provides such support as individual tax breaks, household expense subsidies, industrial relief, and business tax cuts. There are three types of relief: financial aid, unemployment assistance, and tax breaks. So there is an issue worth our discussing. Should the government step in free markets when pandemic like COVID-19 happens? As our experiences, I think yes. Although economy is based on market economy, however, when a disaster happens, only public authority can solve it with government. Boosting domestic industry is government's duty. But not every situations are the same, so it is still a question worth our discussion. These are my sources. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chan, for your presentation. Now it is time for a Q&A session. Would anyone like to ask Chan a question?
So, hello, Chen, and I have a question. Since Taiwan was very successful with their implementations of actions that that made them successful in combating COVID-19, if other countries were to apply this to their own nations, are there any factors that they need to consider, such as demographics, population, maybe the current financial status of the country, so that they can implement this in their own countries as well successfully?
So because Taiwan is a small country, so the government will control the people more much easier. So when another country wants to have the same thing, they have to. I mean, the first and most important point is technology cooperation. some such as because we use a lot of app or some information, the government spread some information to us by phone and some social media. So I think technological cooperation is the most important point when other country want to have the same, impact. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chan. I'm going to ask you the questions from the chat box now. Do you think the government has done enough to support small businesses in your country?
I think yes, but maybe not because we boost some relief package. It's like about $300 for small companies, but because the coronavirus is not so I think also the companies need to think about what they will do after the coronavirus. Thank you.
All right. Since you mentioned the government hasn't done enough to support small businesses, what do you think? What else do you think the government should do to support small businesses in your country or small companies?
So as Russell's presentation, you can see there are some jobs that are not because of the coronavirus. So the job may be more difficultly after the pandemic. So I think government should help the small companies. Maybe they have to recover, or maybe they'll have to change another field of company that will be the government should do.
All right. Thank you for your answer. Okay, the next question. In terms of education, do you think humanities subjects are still relevant in light of this pandemic, such as literature, music, and arts?
I'm sorry. Sorry, please say it again.
I'll repeat the question.
Okay, thank
In
you.
terms of education, are the humanities subject examples, literature, music, and arts? Are they still relevant in the light of this pandemic?
Oh, okay. So I think yes, because just like I talked about the voucher, the government would like to make people to go out and just go out, and because they want to calm down the people's nervous or the anxiety of the society. So it encourages us to go out, not stay at home. It's a little bit special because we on the vacation we just go out and sightsee in some places in Taiwan. So I think yes.
All right. Thank you, Chan. I'll read the next question. Why is it easier for the people in Taiwan to abide to their government's regulations compared to those in America?
Because we have fewer people. So, because it's just like I said, we use a lot of international way to tell us, such as we actually in Taiwan, every people have a such phone or their computer. So government usually tell us new program or the voucher for as social media. So it's a reason that's why it's easier for people in Taiwan to apply the government's regulation.
All right. Thank you, Chai. You mentioned the triple stimulus voucher. Am I correct?
Yes.
Was that voucher implemented during the pandemic or before? Like, did they have it before or after the pandemic? Before or during the pandemic?
After the pandemic, it was launched maybe 3 weeks ago. Yeah, 3 weeks ago.
Oh, so it's a very new thing lah, right?
Yeah, it's really new.
Okay, so I'll read the next question in the chat box. Do you think that the Asian culture, which puts an importance on group safety instead of individual safety, makes us more able to deal with the pandemic?
Um, important. I think it is more. I think it doesn't make us more able to deal with the pandemic because sorry, I'll answer again. Yes, because the community concept how it is important, how it is more important in our culture because like we usually because we don't stay at home so we go out in the community so that means we have to care about each other not just I'm good but we also have to take care of the others because coronavirus is not just a person not everyone will maybe in fact inject you so community is more maybe it's more help us make more able to deal with the pandemic.
All right. Thank you, Chan. To the YouTube viewers, you can also ask questions for Chan to answer. Okay. Do the other participants have any other questions for Chan? Okay, there's another question from the YouTube Live comment section. What do you think will be the effects on the social structure of society after this pandemic?
Effects, let me think about it. Social structure, I think people will be more, maybe more care about the information that governments launched because there are a lot of free and great great policies that we launched by internet. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chan. Okay, just now you mentioned about the social security problems such as theft and vagrants. Okay, what do you think the government can do to help these people? Because you said why such things happen is because of the economic recession, right? So what can the government do?
Due to the economic recession, so the social instability will rise. So I think the government has to do is fix the economic recession because it's due to it. So
What do you think are the job alternatives for these kinds of people? Like for example, the test and yeah, the job alternatives.
sorry.
What are the job alternatives besides what they are currently doing to stabilize their financial stability? Yes.
你说隔离还有个工作。Oh, so during the pandemic.
Yes, during the pandemic.
During the pandemic, because I think the most effective work is the tourism because nobody will go out. I think the alternative jobs, maybe they work on internet will be the best choice for people. Yeah, because internet doesn't affect by pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Chan. I'll read the next question from the chat box. What can we do to increase awareness about steps we can take to stay safe?
Well, because we go to school, so if like our classmates or our teachers always remind us to wear the masks or wash your hands more often, it's like the way that people will always tell us. And the public hygiene education is like every day teacher will tell us to wash your hands more often. But also we can see a lot of posters on maybe Facebook, Instagram that the government will post it or maybe our friends will post it. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Chan. Now we shall take a 5-minute break before we continue on to the last presenter. a gentle reminder to always turn off your mics and cameras. Thank you. See you shortly. All right, welcome back, everyone. Now we shall continue on to our last presenter, Paul from the Philippines.
Hello, everyone. I am Paul. I am an incoming grade 11 student of the Philippine Science High School Zamboanga Peninsula Region campus from the Philippines. And I will now be presenting my slides. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides.
So, my research topic will be the mental health after COVID-19. And in my presentation, I will be having an introduction, a statement of the problem, analysis, and a conclusion. And for the introduction, and so as of now, the coronavirus pandemic is wreaking havoc around the world. And with the exponential growth of the coronavirus pandemic, governments are forced to devise measures to prevent the increase of positive cases and deaths, one of which is implementing lockdowns or quarantines. Depending on the severeness of the situation in their areas, the length of these quarantines may vary and may last for a week, weeks, a month, or even months. And as these lockdowns and quarantines lengthen, the risk of affecting the mental health of the population also increases. This then poses a grave threat to those affected by the virus. And so I will now state my problems. So the first problem will be that self-isolation among those who are at home and those who are positive with the virus can cause psychological effects, as prolonged confinement can cause anxiety, and also boredom can also cause psychological effects. And then the second problem will be that healthcare workers may develop post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) after working in stressful environments, since they are the frontliners and they are in the epicenter of the pandemic itself. And then there is the third problem, which actually arises from the second problem, in which when the stressful environments that the health workers are working in affect them, they will have a chance that they will be reluctant to their jobs and they will eventually quit, thus causing a shortage of personnel capable of handling patients. And even right now, hospitals um, are having patients that are above and beyond their capacity. And so to analyze this problem, I will be presenting some figures. So as of the 24th of July 2020, there are around 15.3 million positive cases according to the World Health Organization. And considering that this is already a high number and we are still on the coronavirus pandemic itself, when we will expect a higher number by the end of the pandemic. And then there was a study during the 2003 SARS pandemic in which 129 quarantined persons were assessed. And then it was found out that there is a 28.9% chance that people will experience PTSD and a 31.2% chance that people will experience depression. And considering that if we multiply these numbers to 15.3 million, then we will already get a large number. And this is already during the pandemic. What else if after the pandemic? And so steps must be taken to solve this situation. And I am actually highlighting three main steps, and I will be stating the specifics of each step. For the first step, measures minimizing psychological stress must be taken account during and after the pandemic. So there are actually stressors before, during, and after the pandemic. And the stressors before the pandemic are patients who have a psychiatric history associated with anxiety and anger. And during the pandemic, longer periods of quarantine usually are associated with PTSD, avoidance, and anger. Fear for their own health will also induce anxiety to people, and then frustration and boredom during quarantine due to confinement, loss of regular routine, and less social contact with others can also cause detrimental psychological effects. Also, having inadequate basic supplies can cause anxiety and therefore will cause a panic to the general population. And then having inadequate information, including clarity around actions to undertake during the pandemic, will also cause anxiety to the people. And after the pandemic, financial loss due to inability to work will be one of the main reasons that people will develop psychological, like it will affect their psychological makeup. And then stigma, in which participants or those who are positive or suspected to be positive with the disease will experience rejection and avoidance by others, and therefore they were treated with fear and suspicion. And for the second main step that must be undertaken is recognition for healthcare workers. And this is actually encouraged because they are the ones who are accommodating to the patients. And to do this, support from everyone must be done because their morale must their morale must be high in order for them to carry out their functions. And for the third step, programs on easing mental health concerns of the population must be done in the aftermath of the pandemic. This may include some, for example, some psychiatric evaluations, surveys, talk with a life coach maybe. And, and this is very important since after the pandemic, we are already beyond the problems of the physical threats of the virus, and now we are already undertaking the mental and emotional stress of the virus. And that is actually the problem that the governments are will undertake if the pandemic is already over. And for the youth, the role of the youth for these steps, one will be, since as Mark said, that we are the youth are updated and well versed with technology and the digital age, so we can actually use that to our advantage and create some actions into the problem, in which an example would be, for example, this forum. This forum is actually a solution to, not actually a solution, but a step to be undertaken so that we can perhaps persuade or deliver information to the people. And also youth can disseminate information through posters online, being social media influencers. And after the pandemic, in which we can already do, we can engage in close contact, then the youth can also do programs that can help in assessing the psychological state of people, such as bringing like a psychology drive to a place, and then assessing the people, for example, a particular community in their mental state. And then to conclude, the COVID-19 pandemic is a problem that not only affects the physical state of a person, but also their mental and emotional state. In the event of the pandemic being no more, only the psychological problem remain. Therefore, certain steps must be undertaken to address not only just one problem, which is the physical threat of the virus, but also the emotional and the mental effects of the pandemic. And then let me end my presentation with a quote, also from Abraham Lincoln, that actions speak louder than words. in which what we are doing here is discussing some points or some solutions to this problem. This would be useless if we don't actually apply them in real life. So that's why I chose this code. And also, let me also give the message to my fellow youth or participants, in which I will say that since the coronavirus is wreaking havoc around the world, the cooperation of everyone is highly encouraged, and this includes us, the youth, to contribute the way we can. And even if we are still young and we have so much more to learn about life, let our small efforts make big differences to the world. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Now it is time for a Q&A session. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask Paul?
Yes, I have a question for Paul. So, how do you assess medical workers, especially those from China? As we can see, they've worked hard during the epidemic, and after the epidemic sort of finished, the government sent them to Italy to support the Italian doctors. So, how do you think it affects the mental workers of the Chinese medical workers? Thank you.
So the coronavirus, the healthcare workers are in the epicenter of the pandemic itself, and therefore they are under the psychological stress of being in their workplace, and so what we can like what they experience there, all um, the anxiety, the fear, the drama. Even if, like, for example, healthcare workers also fear that they will infect their families, and so they will be precautious to what they will do, and also this will also distance them from their families. We, so that's why we can say that we can, like, healthcare workers can be assessed in the way that we can see, like like we can see how they are doing in their workplaces. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask Paul?
I have a question. Hi, Paul. It is undeniable that the mental health state of students and educators are also being gravely affected by this pandemic. Do you think that an implementation of an academic freeze would be beneficial to prevent further psychological stress to the students and educators? Why or why not?
For me, implementing an educational freeze would, I say, affect the mental state of students and teachers in a way that is detrimental, I think, because since the pandemic itself is already stressful, and also, like, since, like, the pandemic is already stressful, and then we are under these quarantines, and then we are confined with anxiety and boredom, and then I think it's actually a hard thing to say, since also boredom also causes some mental effects to a person. And if you don't impose some academic, like, if you impose an academic freeze, then you will actually add up to that boredom of the students, and so that they will be occupied by thinking about the pandemic itself. But if you also say that the pandemic is already implementing some anxious state to the students, then we can also say that this will increase their anxiety even more, since they have the pandemic to worry about, and also their academics to worry about, and also the teachers also. And so I can't really say for myself because each implementing an academic phase has its own advantages and disadvantages also. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Would anyone else like to ask Paul a question? Okay, I'll ask Paul the questions from the chat box now. Do you think there is a stigma around mental health in the Philippines?
Okay, from what I have seen, people are already preoccupying themselves with things to do during this quarantine, as I have observed from my friends, loved ones, even classmates, and also people have been using social media as a way to be updated of um, the current issues and news about the pandemic. But about the mental stigma on the Filipinos, I think there is actually like less stigma because personally I think Filipinos know how to be like know how to preoccupy themselves with things that they can do to be happy and be not think about the anxiety of the virus, but also the lack of information and the clarity of the information being delivered can also cause this stigma in which it will incur anxiety to the people. So that's all I can say for that matter. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Mark, do you have anything to add since you're from the Philippines too about the mental health stigma in your country?
Um, I do believe that these past few years, since the Philippines have already passed a legislation regarding a law on mental health, most of the Filipino population have already been well oriented and already have enough knowledge on how to handle these kinds of mental issues. They already know that mental issues are indeed illnesses that need to be treated, and these are real psychological issues. However, just like any other countries, there are still a lot of Filipinos as well who are not really well oriented yet into these kinds of matters. However, I believe that the Philippines is going in the right direction since the legislation has already been implemented.
All right, thank you, Mark. For Paul, I'll ask the next question from the chat box. Are schools and workplaces aiding their students and employees with their mental health management in the Philippines and globally?
For that matter, I can actually use an example. For, my school, for example, this past few weeks, our guidance unit actually sent us some surveys in order to assess our mental health. And also, I can also say that these measures are also undertaken by other schools around the country, since since the government also knows that the pandemic not only has this physical effects to the body, but also detrimental mental effects due to confinement and self-isolation, quarantines, or lockdowns. Eh, uh, from my situation, my school already implemented some measures undertaken to assess the mental state of the students. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. I'll ask the last question I'll ask your last question. Mental health services such as therapy is quite expensive for the general population. How can we make it affordable?
Um, Actually, I I can actually state an example because I have been part of an organization, some sort of I think we can call it a family in which we create some programs and then activities. For example, during this COVID-19 pandemic, and what we actually did was we we hosted a webinar in which we invited some professionals, some professional help for example, life coaches, and then we invited people who wanted to join, and so this actually creates a free, like a free consultation of the psychological state of the person. So this is one of the ways that we can actually make therapies and psychological evaluations very affordable and even free. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Okay, our forum for this session has come to an end. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all our panelists for providing their very insightful views on this research category, the world after COVID-19. Thank you also to everyone else who attended this forum, and I hope it has benefited you in some way or another. Now, before we really end